This is the Moreish podcast, where Caribbean history meets culture and cuisine. Hi, Teri. I'm so excited for this conversation. We connected through social media, and I've been watching your TikToks for quite a while. And you very recently posted a hops bread recipe.
Mhm.
And I started to do a little bit of digging and realized you have so many Trinbagonian Christmas recipes. Christmas is coming up. This is the perfect time to have this conversation.
Yeah, this is something I started doing last year actually. I started posting Christmas recipes. It started with me just posting a ham and it was well received and I decided to do more recipes. And this year I decided, you know what, I'm going to do it again, but this time I will do an eco book and it's been doing very, very well.
Before we dive into this conversation, why don't you introduce yourself and what you do?
My name is Teresa, but my friends call me Teri, hence the name Teri's Food Therapy. I am a self-taught cook. I have been doing food through my business, Teri's Food Therapy, for maybe 8 years now. I initially started off with just micro catering, something that spawned off of me cooking for friends and family. And recently I have been kind of dialing back the catering because I realized that's not like my first love. I like sharing my recipes. I like cooking. I like food, but I don't really like the catering so much. So I have been working on sharing my recipes through e-cookbooks, through my website, through my social media, and hopefully that will evolve into product creation so that I can give people a little bit more of the food therapy in the future or in the near future.
Before we get into Christmas, what does food therapy mean?
To me, it means an expression of self. Food is a very, very big part of my life. I remember having a fake cooking show in the kitchen as a child, and that kind of just eventually spawned into, what this is now. But for a long time, it was just me trying out new foods. It was me using food as a way to relax, take the edge off after a hard day of work. And it's just snowballed into me sharing my style of food with so many different people.
You know what I love about that is my family is Trinidadian. You are Trinidadian in Trinidad. Food is such a big part of the culture, right?
Huge.
It is absolute. Everywhere you go, you're going to get food. Somebody's going
Yep.
to ask you, "Did you eat?
Mhm.
You eat?" I grew up in Toronto watching cooking shows as a young child, even before things like the Food Network became popular.
Oh,
And I just naturally was always in the kitchen and I would start cooking. And I think it's just in us.
mhm.
What was one of the first things you remember actually cooking yourself?
But that is really, really hard to remember, to be quite honest. My mom was very protective of her kitchen space. So there was not a lot going on in her kitchen until I left home to be on my own.
Mhm.
But it's thinking back, it's really hard to remember what was one of the first things. But
I mean, if you were like me growing up, I was always in the kitchen. Doesn't mean I was cooking, but just
right.
always like hanging around, whether it's one of my
Oh, no.
aunties.
We were allowed to help. I remember, I think mainly Sunday,
Mhm.
Sunday food in a Caribbean home is always a production, right?
Mhm.
So mainly the callaloo, because my mom is a from scratch type person. She is very traditional and now she has adopted some more modernized techniques. But I remember grating coconuts, even when, blenders were readily accessible. I remember, pulling the tips off of the dashing bush.
Mhm.
I remember we had cut up the oak with the pumpkin, everything. So I remember helping out in the kitchen a lot.
Mhm.
It's probably only, as I said, when I left home, that's when I was really able to kind of dip into my end of, food.
Definitely helping out. I was like the roti flipper. I was the fry bake person. I would do those things until I started to cook for myself. But it's December and Christmas is coming up, and it is such a big food time. I want to talk about some of the Christmas recipes because you have a whole bunch of them on your website. And there are some things in Trinidad and across the Caribbean that are made specifically at Christmas?
We have, I think with every holiday is I was telling my husband earlier, we are such a big holiday food culture where almost every holiday has all this food surrounding it. And of course, as you said, Christmas is no different. One of the things I made sure to add first to my list was ham, because we will with the ham. Ham is, yeah, one or two hams over the holidays. Traditionally, we definitely eat a lot of pork, especially local pork closer to Christmas. So we have a lot of pork-based recipes. Hops, because you have to have your ham and hops. Christmas morning with your glass of sorrel. Sorrel is the other thing. I think now we get it a little bit easier because we'll get sorrel right through the year. You'll get the dried sorrel leaves to purchase as opposed to waiting until it's blooming in December. But sorrel is definitely a must-have around the holidays. Things like pastel, pay me, black cake is such a huge part of Trinbagonian Christmas culture. Those are some of the foods that when you think about it, you think Christmas as soon as you hear those things. Yeah.
And some of these dishes are made across the Caribbean
Yeah.
in various ways. And I even think from household to household, whether the way my family makes something is probably going to be slightly different than the way you cook it.
It does. It varies so much. A lot of people can't come to breast. Can't, it's so hard for them. Especially like sharing recipes. It's so difficult for them to come to light that, we may do things differently, but it varies, maybe just light tweaks and others in larger ways, across Trinidad and Tobago and across the larger Caribbean. So yeah.
Yeah. When you talk about some of these dishes, I want to dive into some of them a little bit because they're so unique and flavorful and have um such different origins. So I'm going to start with sorrel because that is one of my favorite things. And I'm in Toronto, so I'm lucky if I can find fresh, but mostly it's just dried that I get. Tell us what sorrel is.
Sorrel is essentially a drink. It comes from the sorrel plant. We call it sorrel, but it's also known as hibiscus. And what we use to make the drink is essentially the flower that you remove the seed from the flower. Well, most persons, that's how I know it. I know people who boil it with the seed and they just strain it with a fine mesh strainer. I've never done it that way before. So you remove the seed and you boil the flour, which is mainly red, but we have grown. I remember us growing the green version that even when it ripens, it still remains green. That usually draws a white sorrel drink.
I've never seen.
Yeah, that
Interesting.
one I don't see that one anymore. At least I haven't seen it. I've seen the red and the really really dark red one, which people call black sorrel. So you just boil it for about a few minutes and then you let it steep overnight. We usually add like cloves, cinnamon, bay leaf, ginger. Again, that is something as well that varies over, from home to home and country to country. And you sweeten it. It is a little tart. The flavors really big, big flavors. And it really is refreshing. Sorrel is something that I drink all year round. Dry, fresh. I enjoy it all the same.
Now, most people drink it with a little bit of rum or something. Yes.
It's right the Caribbean way. I've been holding out on my spiked sorrel post for a while to let everybody know that remember, spike your sorrel, please. But yeah, a little bit of rum.
What kind of rum usually goes in it?
And I don't think traditionally you have like a particular rum that you have to when, especially as it pertains to liquor in the Caribbean, because we call almost everything rum most time. That's just the way we refer to alcohol. So it's whatever you like. You put a little in it, and that's just fine.
So you said this earlier that normally the hibiscus or the sorrel grows around this time of the year.
Christmas time. Yeah.
Which probably is why it became a Christmas
I
drink.
think much. Yes, most definitely. The fresh sorrel, you'll start seeing that around the Christmas time. And you can get a little bit going into the carnival season because I remember us making sorrel around carnival season as well.
Uh-huh. One of the Christmas dishes that I have never made, and it wasn't something that was made in my home growing up, is pastel.
Right.
And it is such an interesting dish because a version or a variation is made all over the Caribbean, but also in so many different places. Have you made it?
I have. It's probably my least favorite Christmas food to make. It is very, very time consuming. Essentially, it is corn flour, right? So it's the finer ground cornmeal that you make into a dough. And then you do a filling. Is the filling varies. You could use minced beef, minced chicken, soya. There's a lot of people use different fillings in it. And you cook it down with seasonings. We are obviously big on seasonings in the Caribbean. So you have all the fresh seasonings, your shadow benny, onions, garlic, that kind of thing. And you also add olives and things like olives and capers to give it a little salty umami flavor in there as well. Raisins is something that some people, I have to say some person, add in their pastel because there's a big debate about raisins belonging in pastels or not being in pastels. I like it. I like the contrasting flavors. And you roll out your dough into like a round shape. You fill the insides with some of that filling. You wrap your filling back because that's the traditional way to make it. You use the fig leaves and you freeze that, or you can enjoy it just as you make it. So you steam, or you can also boil it in like a shallow pan of water. And that's essentially pastels. And once you have one, you're probably going to have two or three
Mhm.
because it's very good. It is very good.
It is very good. And I think because it's so time consuming is probably why not many people make it.
Yeah. And that's why it's also so expensive. That's a lot of time.
And across the Caribbean, I talked to somebody from Puerto Rico and they have a version called pasteles. And she said they
Right.
make it with yuca or cassava.
Right.
And it's similar to tamales in Mexico, sort of the same concept, but with Caribbean flavors.
Yes, yes. Because we're so close to Venezuela, that is where we would have gotten our version from. And of course, as with anything else, when it comes to a different country, you find the country adapts their own version. There are actually so many variations that I have seen researching online of pastels, and some called, as you said, almost called pastels as well. But it always is just a little slightly different, maybe wrapped in something a little different. I've even seen someone do a flour version locally. So the dough is actually made out of flour as opposed to corn flour. And she was explaining that this is something that this vision is the vision that she grew up with as well in her area. So yeah, and that's business in Trinidad. So yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was on your website that I saw this, a pastel pie.
Yes.
Is it? No, tell me about that. Is it the same ingredients just in a pie form?
Yes, it is. Well, we love our pies in Trinidad. We love our pies. And it's so much easier to do. Of course, it's a bit different because the pies would have a thicker, the cornmeal base would be a bit thicker. And as with all the other pies we add cheese. But it's so much easier to still get some of the pastel flavor making it this way because you don't have make how many different amount of pastas. You just do one pie and it's one and done. I've seen a couple different variations and that also resembles tamale pie.
Oh.
Yes. So there's a version. I'm sure probably the persons who tamale originated from don't know about it. But I have seen tamale pie and it's very, very similar to that when you do the pastel pie. I just put my filling in the center. Some people mix the filling into the cornmeal itself and bake
Mm.
it as a pie. So yeah.
I've really always wanted to make pastels, but it just looks like so much work. So I think I might start with the pie and then maybe next year try actually doing the whole wrapping of the leaves. if I can even find the leaves here in Canada.
But you can use foil, and I know that might sound like blasphemy to some people, but you can. The leaves are sometimes a challenge for me. So I use foil, and it's perfectly fine. The only issue may be, you're not really supposed to heat foil so much when you're using it with cooking. But yeah, sometimes I use foil and it's one and done and it's easy and it's fine. So it's an option.
When we talk about pies, because you said we love our pies, and we absolutely love our pies. When I talk about pies here in Canada, it's a completely different thing than what we talk about in Trinidad.
Just an e-cookbook alone, I have probably about 6 pies. And essentially our pies are a starch and we mix in with cheese and milk and seasonings and butter and sometimes eggs. And we normally top it off with cheese and we bake it. So normally what happens is it's solidified um, into this thing that you could slice. And it's almost always a side, which it really shouldn't be because of the amount of calories, but it's commonplace. So we have, I have listed shepherd's pie, which again, once it gets to the Caribbean, we are going to make our own version of it.
Mhm.
So it's shepherd's pie, but it's beef based in most homes, at least the homes that I've eaten it in. It's usually made with ground beef. Macaroni pie, which is very similar to mac and cheese, but then it is also very different.
Mm.
Potato pie. I have listed corn pie. We have lasagna, which would also be considered a pie to us. And all of these things may have roots in different places, more than likely coming from like British influence and Italian influences, but we always take it and make our own versions of it. And that's pie. Pie with chicken and rice and salad. That's usually what a Christmas plate or even a Sunday lunch plate looks like in Trinidad to people.
Mhm. And when we talk about pie, it's usually what I think people here might call a casserole, right?
Right.
Because it's made in like that kind of a dish, but it's a side dish, and it's usually, like you said, a side dish, maybe starch based. And there's so many different versions. Like there's like green fig pie and
Mhm.
and macaroni pie, and they all have what you said, cheese, seasoning. What's the most common cheese to use for some of these?
The most common cheese you'll find in the grocery is, well, it's labeled New Zealand cheddar
Mhm.
cheese. That's the cheese we use. So most of the time when you hear someone refer to cheese in Trinidad, is that type of cheese that we're referring to. So it's a really light cheddar cheese. I'm guessing groceries and stuff buy it in like really big blocks. And then they cut it up and they wrap it in like a cling wrap or whatever. But it normally is labeled New Zealand cheddar, if I remember correct.
And New Zealand cheddar, interestingly enough, we can get it here in Canada, but it is very expensive.
Yeah. It's really, I mean, it's probably the most affordable cheese local.
When
So,
when I when I was growing up and would go to Trinidad, there was something that people would call government cheese.
right.
Is that the same cheese?
I am not sure, to be honest. It's something I grew up hearing, but not being entirely sure what it was. So it's quite possible if that is the cheese that we have been using for a long period of time, it's quite possible. I know there are versions of New Zealand cheddar that is expensive, even here. I'm guessing that's probably because of the grade of the cheese.
Mhm.
So that probably is the deciding factor there, because definitely I don't think this particular type of cheese would be priced really expensive, elsewhere. But you
Right.
never know.
When it comes to Christmas food, desserts are a big thing. What is your go-to, or what do you normally cook and bake
Is it
dessert-wise for Christmas?
black cake is definitely one of my favorites associated with Christmas.
It's not Christmas without a black cake.
Mm.
And the name describes what it looks like, but people who don't know what black cake is would never understand. I've seen people look at a black cake and think that it might be chocolate because of the color. So let's talk about what black cake is.
So essentially, it is, some people call it a pudding because of the texture, but basically you use these rum-soaked fruits, and all of these fruits are dried before. So you're using raisins, currants, prunes. Sometimes you use the mixed fruits that is essentially purple that is preserved. You mix in all of these things together, and then you're soaking it in rum and brandy, or rum or brandy. And a lot of people soak their fruits months in advance, some people years in advance. Some people have jars of fruits that have been soaking, and they just keep topping it up with more fruits and more alcohol, because of course the alcohol preserves the fruits.
Yeah.
And earlier on, what you would have done is grind these fruits in what we call a mill, using this mill into like a paste or some like ground beef texture,
Hmm.
right? And you mix this into what is a typical cake batter. We still use flour, we still use eggs, we still use butter. And we don't use milk in this particular cake because we use something called browning. And that is what gives it that black cake color. So browning is essentially when you liquefy sugar in a process similar to caramelization,
Hmm.
and you liquefy it until it gets this really dark, rich brown color just before the sugar burns to the point of being bitter. And you use that syrupy kind of liquid after it cools, of course, to put into your black cake to give it that really rich, dark color. And then you bake it. And after the baking process, you soak the cake as many times as you like in that same brandy or rum, which also will going to preserve it. A lot of times black cake can last for really, really long before it starts going bad because of the process of soaking it in the alcohol. So
Do you think that that is a variation on a British pudding or dessert or fruitcake?
I believe the research that I did said plum pudding was the inspiration.
Uh-huh.
And of course, again, it came to these shores, and I believe it was the African slaves that changed the structure of it a bit, added their own flair and flavor, and turned it into what it is today.
If you were to describe Trinidadian food, how would you describe it?
Oh my goodness. Whew. Bold. We have some big, bold flavors, and it is so unique. The flavors are just so, I can't even find it. I think it's really something that you have to experience to really understand. But it's very unique as well because we have so many different influences from so many different places.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people don't realize that we may traditionally look at our food as East Indian or African, but the mix of it all, especially as it pertains to the ingredients that we have available locally, it is most likely at by the time we, get our hands on it, mixed with a little bit of something else from here and a little bit of something else from there, and it is definitely uniquely Trinidad and Tobagoan when it comes to
Now, I agree that the influences come from history and way back, but it has its own unique flair right now.
leaders.
We were talking about black cake. What are the other desserts that you typically would make for Christmas?
We sponge cake as well, which is a basic, a basic, for lack of a better word, sponge cake. We have black cake, we have sponge cake, we have sweetbread, and then we have something that I haven't had in so long that just thinking about it earlier on today made me feel like I need to get some this Christmas, which is pili, is the sweet version or the sweet cousin to pastel. Same cornmeal base, but this one is made sweet, so wrapped in the same fig leaf. This one usually contains raisins as well.
Hmm.
It doesn't have any filling in this one. This one is it's just the pimmy that the cornmeal dough that you're enjoying.
Hmm.
But I looking at this one again, so many variations. I know that there was First People's influence from some of the research I did. Then I saw Latin America, places like Venezuela and stuff like that. And then I saw a lot of versions as well in Africa of this sweet. But it is something that you don't see a lot anymore. At least I don't see a lot. And I remember my aunt used to make a very delicious pay. So I'll definitely have to talk to her about possibly getting the recipe and maybe getting some this one day because it is very delicious.
What else is on your Christmas table?
Um, what else? Well, of course, as I said, we have a lot of pies. We have ham. Hops is another thing because that's what you talked about. That's what you saw first.
Hmm.
So, hops is essentially a dinner roll, but recently finding out that actually it is very uniquely Trinidad or Trinbagonian because the first version was created locally. So it's like a crusty roll that we would traditionally have with our ham and whatever other accompaniments on Christmas morning, created by, I believe the gentleman was British, but he was looking at French Creole bakers who were using the hops the extract of the hops meal hops flour and using it to create this unique bread that will give you this nice crusty top, as I mentioned, and so fluffy inside. And it's been a big part of Trinbagonian traditions because you need to have your hops and ham Christmas morning
Hmm.
with your glass of sorrel. Otherwise, it's not Christmas.
No. And hops bread is something that you've perfectly described it with that crusty, crusty top and then soft in the middle. But it's hops bread and ham, or it's there's so many ways that you can eat it. And I remember visiting and going to stay with my grandmother, and across the street was somebody who had a little parlor under their house, and they would sell hops bread that they made in their kitchen. And it would be like hops with sardines, maybe, or sardine choka, or just cheese.
I've lived in Trinidad all my life, so my experiences are limited. And because I haven't had much more experiences outside of our culture, all of these things seem regular.
Yeah.
Only when you're looking into it, or I might post it and somebody would ask a question, ask me to elaborate, ask me, say it's interesting. They've never seen it made this way. It's only then you realize, oh wait, this is actually not a commonplace thing. Other cultures don't, some other cultures don't, on their way home from work, decide to grab some hops from any neighborhood bakery to
Mhm.
have with something else to eat at night or to eat for breakfast. It is very uniquely, from what I understand, Trinbagonian. Definitely it does make you feel all warm inside. Thinking that, this unique culture, you get to indulge in it. And as we said in the beginning, food is such a huge part of any aspect of Trinbagonian culture.
Mhm.
So looking at all these little things tied together and it just is really, really, really special.
It is so special to think about even some of the dishes we've been talking about, that the influences, historical, how they've made them, these recipes uniquely Trinbagonian. And somebody might look at your Christmas table and think, how do you put these different dishes together? Because they don't feel like they match, but they do. They're just a plethora of unique and interesting flavors that just go so well together.
They do. They definitely do.
What's a must-have for you for Christmas that you're just like, if I don't make anything else, I'm making this one thing?
Ham. Definitely ham. It's the first thing to go. I can't tell you how many times I burned my mouth after making, it has to cool, but you just want a slice, a taste, a piece of the
Mhm.
ham. I had to do my early because I was putting together my pictures and recipes for my
Right.
cookbook. So I just tried to do it around other celebrations.
Tell me how you prepare your ham.
I like experimenting. So traditionally we would score the ham, which is to just cut the rind, maybe a little bit of the flesh. Everybody has different ways that they do it. If I am doing glaze, I will cut a little bit of the flesh. If I'm just doing how we do traditionally, which is to cut the rind, insert cloves into the rind. Sometimes some people bake it with pineapples and such or the top of it. That is the most common way you would see it being. But that is now within more modern time. Before, and my aunt-in-law does this still, because we had two hams from her for the last maybe 2 or 3 years, I think, where she does her hams from scratch, the traditional way. She salts it and stuff from scratch, so you just have to boil it and then bake it. But now, of course, we have hams we manufactured in large amounts, and you don't need to go through all of that. So I love glazed ham. Absolutely love a glazed ham. So most times I will glaze mine now, as opposed to doing it the traditional way, which is just baking it with the cloves, sweet glaze most times to give you the sweet savory balance. So I have a brown sugar glazed ham that I had on my website as well as my social media pages. And this year the first one I did was orange pine rum glazed ham, because you must have the rum. I love having the glaze because hams are salty most time, very savory, and the sweet gives it a nice balance. So that's usually how I would do it.
Just the cloves. That's how I remember it. Just baked with the cloves. And it has that cap of fat with the skin on top that gets nice and crispy, and the fat sort of keeps it nice and juicy. And
Yes,
for me, when
definitely.
I was growing up, and it sounds so simple, it would be ham on hops bread with maybe some mustard, pepper sauce, and that's it. That's the simplicity of exactly how I would eat it.
Yeah, that's definitely how I remember it. And only now that I again allowed to do my own thing,
Mhm.
I had to be judged a little, simply because I like experimenting. And one of the things that I absolutely love, I started doing it with wings initially. This is one of the recipes I have not shared yet, even though I've had several requests. Planning to do a sorrel glaze with to baste my ham in, which I've seen other people doing it. There are so many versions now of things people experimenting with sorrel. Love to see it. I've seen sorrel barbecue sauce. I made sorrel pepper sauce recently that I used on my hops and ham video. I didn't mention it because I didn't want the questions.
Speaking of your social media and where you post, Terry, you have a website full of recipes, but you also have 3 downloadable cookbooks that you give away for free on your website. Talk about those 3 cookbooks.
What I know since last year, actually, maybe early into this year, that I wanted to do a cookbook for Christmas. And I am by no means a pro at this. I am not formally trained when it comes to cooking. So everything is basically me teaching myself. So what I wanted to do at the beginning of the year was try my hand at doing my first e-cookbook. And I, of course, wanted to stick to as much Trinbagonian recipes as I possibly could. So I focused on doing sweets and snacks that I had as a child, and then I learned to cook. So it was more along the lines of things like mango jam and kurma and fudge, coconut fudge, just to kind of get, maybe dip my toes into the water, see what the response is like, see what the work would entail to get this thing done. And as you said, I did that for free. And then I did one on accident for Diwali because I had these recipes that I wanted to do for Diwali, but then it just kept kind of growing. So I did a small one for Diwali. I think it was 10 pages. Well, not 10 pages, but 10 recipes. And then it was time to work on the one for Christmas, which was the big one. I had my recipes that I did last year. I wanted to put that in, and then I had my recipes I was working on this year, as well as a couple recipes that I don't plan on doing videos for, but I just wanted to include any cookbook to give more variety and exclusivity and all that good stuff. The reason I was able to give it away for free is because I worked with, in this instance, just 2 brands that did some sponsorship in the cookbook in terms of advertisement And that's the angle I was aiming. In the future, that might change based on what I'm doing. But for now, I like doing it this way because everybody gets to experience what I have to offer, and I can still, do the business aspect of it.
I'm going to put the link to your website and also your social media in the show notes so people can go look, because not only are you sharing the recipes on your website, but you're also showing how you're making them in your videos. Before we wrap up, outside of your cookbooks on your website, the recipes on your website, your YouTube channel, and Instagram and TikTok, is there anything else that you're working on that we want to share with us?
I have been working on something that I'm taking my time with simply because of what it means to me. I've been doing a lot of product testing. I have been working on some stuff, and I'm hoping that soon I'd be able to launch and offer these things. My aim is to do small batch. I know most persons want to think big corporation, big product match out and all of that, but I'm perfectly fine with quality items
Mhm.
that are almost homemade, manufactured in a homemade setting, that I can offer persons. So I have been working on that. Hopefully, I'll be able to start giving people due dates on when we'll be rolling out those things. But for now, it's still in the testing phase because I
Mhm.
want to be sure that it's ready when it's ready.
Can you give us
So,
any little hints? Is that going to be like a sauce or a spice or?
um, quite a few items actually. So I love tea. There will be
Oh,
a line of chives actually to start with because I'm obsessed with chives. I have chili oil that I'm working on. I have barbecue sauces or just sauces on the whole that I'm working on. And I have a line of granola, healthy, more on the healthy side of things. And I am also already thinking about what other cookbook I could put together.
mhm.
Soon. We were talking about the Diwali cookbook that I have. There's something that I've been wanting to work on for so long, which is basically just showcasing curries from different parts of the world. Because
Oh,
I know a lot of people don't realize that there are so many different blends of curries. So that's also another project that I hope to start working on very, very soon. As soon as Christmas wraps up, I'll be getting into that. So those are some of the things I've been focusing on. I know you mentioned my YouTube. I haven't done a lot of work on my YouTube. YouTube takes so much more work than just making a 2-minute video. The plan is definitely to start doing more in-depth videos on YouTube. So that's the direction that I'm heading in, hopefully in 2025.
so I mean, you already are doing so much and putting out. I understand adding YouTube and then adding products. It is a full-time
I love
job and a half to do all of this. So I so appreciate you taking the time to come on and chat with me about foods, and specifically foods that are served around Christmas time. I'm going to put the links in the show notes. If anybody's interested in recipes for any of the things that we talked about, or maybe any other recipes that Teri has put out, you can go find her cookbooks or any of the recipes on her website.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure.
It has been so much fun, and I wish you and your family a very happy, wonderful, and full belly Christmas.
Same to you and yours.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Moreish Podcast. Connect with us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at the Moreish Podcast. See you for the next episode.